Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
we must make the most of this opportunity to reimagine our school board.
Big action in Springfield on an elected school board for Chicago Public Schools.
I'm concerned about the fact that there are people who are dead.
Spiking violence in Chicago. Our Spotlight Politics team on the mayor's reaction and more.
It changed my life in mostly good ways.
Arthur George R.R. Martin on the Game of Thrones phenomenon and his time at Northwestern. How local groups are documenting the experiences of transgender Chicagoans. A new study shows an alarming trend in children who've been sick with COVID-19.
Being connected to one's vision, it's just extremely crucial.
And an artist looks back at his personal and professional growth in a new exhibit. But first, some of today's top stories. The victim of a Chicago police raid gone wrong says the mayor and her law department have done little to correct the issues that led to the botched raid. Social worker Anjanette Young says Mayor Lori Lightfoot's law department is threatening to file a motion to dismiss Young's lawsuit against the city. Young met with the mayor earlier this year after video from CBS 2 revealed that police stormed Young's apartment, handcuffed her while she was still naked, and searched the apartment as she pleaded that they had the wrong address. In a statement, the city's law department says Young's attorney, quote, chose to reject the city's offers and walked away from further settlement discussions. In light of that, we have no choice but to litigate. There's more of that story on our website. Those who purchase guns for people who aren't legally allowed to possess them are in the crosshairs of federal law enforcement this summer. The Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Chicago office is partnering with U.S. attorneys in both Northern Illinois and Indiana to roll out a campaign discouraging those so-called straw purchases.
We're putting firearms into the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Felons, people who have domestic violence misdemeanor convictions, people who have orders of protection against them, people who have been adjudicated mentally ill. We shouldn't be putting firearms into their hands.
Officials say people who make purchases for others and lie about it on an ATF form can face up to 10 years in federal prison. Officials say this summer's Don't Lie for the Other Guy campaign will be rolled out on billboards, radio, and social media. June 19th, known to many as Juneteenth, is officially a state holiday in Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the legislation today making Juneteenth National Freedom Day in Illinois. The state's first black lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, thought about what a day like today would have meant for her enslaved ancestors.
And I think about how they must have prayed for our freedom. There must have been days that they never imagined it for themselves, but they prayed that their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and those of us standing here today, that we would one day be free.
This Saturday, all flags covered by the Illinois Flag Display Act will be lowered to half-staff. Additionally, a Juneteenth flag will fly over the state capitol in Springfield. The first paid Juneteenth holiday for state and public education workers will be in 2023. It's day 2 of a special summer session in Springfield, and legislators' actions could have a big impact on Chicago. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, politicians pulled the plug, if you will, on that big energy legislation, but they did muster the energy to move forward on a controversial proposal, creating an elected Board of Education to govern Chicago public schools.
What this is a down payment on democracy. This is a practical, common sense bill. This is not revolution. This is reform. We know about the sordid past of the school district that I am a product of. We know about the history from Willis wagons to the mass closings of 50 schools, which I think would give anybody in this chamber pause if that happened in their community.
That CPS elected school board measure passed the House just about a half an hour ago by a vote of 70 to 41. Now, it isn't law yet. Governor J.B. Pritzker will need to sign it in order for that to be the case, but he has in the past indicated that he is in favor of an elected school board, and he's not bound to go back on his word on this one. Now, CPS will, when this becomes law, be get that elected board in place by 2027. Then leading up to it, it would be a hybrid board. So some members elected, others appointed by the mayor, but also have to go through city council confirmation. The proposal also says no more school closures until that elected board can be seated. Now, this House vote came despite legislators who say they favor the concept of an elected board, saying that this particular plan wasn't ready for prime time. Also, and this is a big defeat for Mayor Lori Lightfoot because it came despite another last-minute push from Lori Lightfoot to try to kill the bill with her handpicked president of the CPS Board of Education, former state senator Miguel Del Valle, telling lawmakers at a hearing this morning that he's, yes, long advocated for an elected school board, but not this one because he says a 21-member board is simply too big. Now, the sponsor, State Representative Delia Ramirez, would not commit to downsizing it, but she did say, yes, she's going to continue to work on this plan, including other criticisms like putting campaign finance limits on races for school board seats and paving the path for CPS parents who are undocumented to be able to have a seat on the board. Del Valle was skeptical.
I don't hold out much hope that the undocumented parents, when all is said and done, will be able to vote for an elected school board. I just don't see any indication that that is going to happen.
In order to get this done, a bit different for the first time in the Illinois House, legislators cast their votes on this measure, well, some of them from home. The House today adjusting its rules, allowing lawmakers to vote remotely on bills. It didn't go great at first. There were technical hiccups as they got started.
Representative Crespo.
Those things did get cleared up soon after. Now, remote voting would have once been unthought of, but of course, COVID pandemic changed that. The state Senate has allowed this all session long, but Republicans in the House were fired up. They say, after all, this change, which by the way is just temporary, wasn't made back when COVID cases were soaring. It came today when all of Illinois is back open and resuming business, at least pretty close to usual.
This change for remote voting has nothing to do with COVID. This change has to do with the fact that they need 71 votes to correct the budget error that they themselves caused by introducing a 3,000-page budget 10 minutes to midnight on May 31st. They need 71 votes to be able to correct that today. They couldn't get 71 people to show up.
Now, here is what Representative Tom Demmer there is talking about. Illinois needs to have a budget in place before next month, but that $43 billion spending plan that Democrats approved last month over GOP objections, well, a big mistake was discovered in it, a mistake that would have kept big chunks of the budget from not taking effect until next summer, as in July of 2022. So Governor J.B. Pritzker used his amendatory veto powers yesterday to make a switch in the dates. Democrats then needed 71 votes today to be able to accept those changes and then making the budget become law. But not enough Democrats could make it to the Capitol for this special session. Hence, they changed the rules. Republican Representative Mike Marin says that something as important as a budget, having been riddled with errors, shows why it's problematic that you have 3,000-page bills passing in the wee hours of the night with little room for public or even legislative scrutiny.
This is the worst kind of process. I won't even call it a democratic process because it doesn't deserve that title. I was appalled after being in county government, seeing how business was conducted in Springfield. My shock has now turned to shame.
Now, Republicans also say that if Pritzker was going to use his veto pen to make any changes to the spending plan, he should have used it to do things like nixing legislative pay raises that are contained in the budget. They're due to get about $2,000 extra a year. Governor Pritzker was asked about that today in Springfield.
This was first of all, a Scrivener's error that we're correcting at the request of the General Assembly. So that's what that amendatory veto was about. Renegotiating, changing substantive portions of the bill was not something that anyone was planning to do. This is just fixing the effective dates.
Now, this remote voting didn't just get Illinois a budget and the CPS elected school board. Also, legislators sending to Pritzker a bill that will mandate background checks for all gun sales. The measure also gives people the option to share their fingerprints with the state if they want to speed up getting a firearm owner's identification card. That is the license required for anyone in Illinois to own a gun.
I believe this will save lives in Illinois. I believe it'll ensure the constitutionality of our FOID system, and it'll move us forward in making sure that universal background checks take place on all gun sales in Illinois.
Now, this is also Illinois' long delayed reaction to a 2019 mass shooting in Aurora. In that case, shooter killed 5 people. His FOID card had been revoked, but law enforcement never actually took the guns from him. State Representative Keith Wheeler went to school with the father of one of the victims, NIU student Taylor Rayner, who was just starting his internship at the Aurora manufacturing plant where the shooting took place.
This bill gives law enforcement the actual chance, the necessary tools to prevent another tragedy from happening to another Illinois family like the Wayners. We have to give that chance.
It is going to be a busy summer for Governor Pritzker as he acts on these and all of the other bills that the legislature has sent his way. Meanwhile, negotiations on that monster energy bill, they are still ongoing. And if they get a deal, we could see legislators returning to Springfield yet again this summer. If not, they're back in their districts until fall. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. We'll see you later on for Spotlight. A notable Northwestern alum is in town this week for some major recognition from his alma mater. Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin, a graduate of Northwestern's Medill Journalism School, was awarded an honorary doctorate at Monday's commencement ceremony. I sat down with Martin and began by talking about the impact of his world-famous book series and the HBO show based off of it. We should note that he says he's not allowed to discuss future Game of Thrones shows and spin-offs in detail, and he won't answer questions about that next book.
It changed my life in mostly good ways, although, you know, looking back, I wish I'd stayed ahead of the books. My biggest issue there was when they began that series, I had 4 books already in print, and the 5th one came out just as the series was starting in 2011. I had a 5-book head start, and these are gigantic books, as you know, if you've seen them. I never thought they would catch up with me, but they did. They caught up with me and passed me, and you know, that made it a little strange because now the show was ahead of me, and the show was going in somewhat different directions. So I'm still working on the book, but you'll see my ending when that comes out.
I want to rewind. You were, you know, an avid reader at a very young age. You used to save your money to buy used paperbacks.
And comic books. You know, comic books were the things I cut my teeth on in the beginning there. You know, at a certain point in my childhood, I started getting a $1 a week allowance, and of course it was another era. So that was 10 comic books. I had 10-cent comic books that I could buy with my $1 a week allowance. And then when I started buying paperbacks, those were 35 cents. So I had to give up 4 comic books to every week to buy a paperback. But I did, because I was addicted to some of that books too, yeah.
And you started doing your own writing and then selling your writing.
Well, in a matter of fashion, yes.
Were dramatic readings of those writings included?
They were, yes, because most of my customers, who were the other kids, I grew up in the projects of Bayonne, New Jersey. And I would write these little 2-3 page stories, you know, handwritten on paper ripped from my notebook, which were mostly monster stories. We didn't use the term horror back then. They were werewolf stories and vampire stories and stories about monsters. And the kids I was selling them to, who were the other kids in the projects, who were mostly younger than me, but they weren't as good readers as me. So I read them the story when they bought it. I read them, and I did the werewolf howls and all of that stuff. And I sold it for a nickel initially, so I would get like 6 nickels, and I could buy more comic books. I could buy Milky Way bars, which was my favorite candy then. And it was a good thing for a while, but then one of the kids started having nightmares because of my werewolf stories, and his mother came to my mother, and my mother said, "Stop scaring the other kids." So I had to stop.
Sorry to hear that. Well, it worked out for you.
It did. It did, yes.
Obviously, later on, you came here to Northwestern to attend Medill.
I did.
Was it a bit of a culture shock coming to the Midwest?
Completely, yeah. We never had a lot of money. My father, my family never even owned a car. I took the buses to get anywhere, and I never went anywhere. I mean, once a year we would go into New York City from Bayonne, which was about 45 minutes away by bus, and we would see the Christmas show at Radio City Music Hall and eat in a Horn and Heart Automat and visit Santa at Macy's. That was our Christmas trip. But that was about the only time I even got into New York, which you could practically see from Bayonne. So I had certainly never been outside of New York, New Jersey. I had never been to anything beyond that. So it was a whole different world to me.
In that time, obviously, you also you experienced some Chicago winters, which, you get some winter in Jersey, but we like to brag about ours here.
Yes, I got immersed in that right away my freshman year. I was in Bob Hall here on the campus, and we got hit with a snowstorm. I believe it was 23 inches. 23 inches in like a day. And I remember it started, and I was walking back from class to the dormitory, and the snow was coming down so heavily that I couldn't see a thing. I'm following the sidewalk, and I literally couldn't see the buildings around me. I couldn't see what was ahead. I saw vague lights through the snow, which I thought was a building, but then I would go to, oh no, that's not my building. Where the hell am I? I was like being lost in a blizzard. But I finally found the dormitory, and then the snow just kept on coming and coming, and I was on the first floor, and it got so high it completely covered the window outside. And then we got hit with a hard freeze, so all the snow that had fallen did not melt for a couple weeks. And they had to dig trenches from the door to the doors of other buildings, and it was like the trench system in World War I, except instead of mud, it was made of snow. You would be in this trench with the walls higher than your head, and there would be people going one direction, people going another, and you'd reach a fork where it met with another tunnel, and people would put up signs, this way to Tech Auditorium, this way to Allison Hall, that kind of stuff. It was like a whole different world for 2 weeks. And then then it got warm, and all the snow melted, and the regular world returned. But I felt like I was on an Arctic planet for a while there. And you can tell by the way I talk about it, I still remember it almost with a certain nostalgia. It was kind of a cool experience, as weird as it was.
Did you later sort of realize how that experience influenced your writing down the road?
Well, I have stolen some of that trench stuff and all that for, the winters at the wall in Game of Thrones. So I can describe some of that, some memory. Yeah, you file everything away. And if you're a writer, if you're a fiction writer, everything that happens to you, good, bad, heartbreak, trauma, love, death, and just little incidents like that, things that, what the scenery looks like, what the weather is like, it all becomes grist for the mill, and you draw on it. Maybe decades or quarter century later, suddenly you're writing something that brings it to mind, and you bring it out again.
And we'll have more of our conversation with George R.R. Martin coming up, including talk about some of his upcoming projects. A transgender-led research group is working on what they hope will be the largest single population data set collected on trans people to date. The Chicago Area Trans Survey will collect information from trans individuals in Cook County, and the project aims to go beyond just finding population numbers. Researchers hope to create a comprehensive set of data that will range from individuals' healthcare experiences to political goals. Joining us are representatives from the two groups working on the survey. Dylan Felt, a research project coordinator for the Evaluation, Data Integration, and Technical Assistance Program at Northwestern University, and Jay Rice, Director of Communications with Brave Space Alliance. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. So, Dylan, let's start with you, please. Can you talk about how this is a more comprehensive approach to this trans-related data than anything that's been done before?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having us on. First of all, I'm really excited to be here and get to talk about this a little bit. So historically, when it comes to trans population health, we've had to rely on national data. Surveys that people have probably heard of, things like the US Transgender survey, are really effective at moving the national policy conversation forward, but not necessarily as effective when it comes to meeting the needs of transgender people in local communities. As an example, the most recent US Trans survey in 2015 collected data from about 27,000 transgender people, only 1,000 of which were in Illinois, and we're not even sure how many of those were in Chicago or Cook County. So when it comes to actually meeting the needs of people in Chicago and Cook County, that data is simply not going to be good enough. It doesn't tell us enough about what transgender people in our communities here really experience and need when it comes to supportive services, opportunities for joy or political liberation. There's so much that's left on the table when you only use national data.
And Jay Rice, what does outreach for this survey look like?
Outreach, well, first, thank you for having us again. And outreach can look like a lot of different things. We have street teams that are going to be formed to do actual on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground outreach. We'll be doing outreach at the different events that Brave Space Alliance will be hosting. It looks like anything, anywhere that trans people may be, we are going to make sure that we're there doing outreach for this survey.
And Jay, why is it important that members of the trans community lead and participate in conducting this survey?
Because quite frankly, we're the ones who knows what trans people need. When you have people who are not in the trans community leading these surveys, there's a disconnect. And then sometimes there's also a focus on just the negatives of what's happening in the trans community. This survey is taking a holistic approach to what trans identity can be. So there are questions about demographics and your usual questions that go along with a survey, but we're also asking folks about what community looks like. How do they find community? Where do they find resources?
So the Chicago Department of Health released data on the LGBT population, estimates that were collected from 2014 to 2016, and research shows that there are approximately 146,000 adult Chicagoans who identify as LGBT, and of that, 138,000 as specifically lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and only 10,500 as transgender. Dylan, I know you're aiming to hear from 30,000 people. What do you make of this large difference in estimates?
Yeah, I think sort of related to what Jay said, our community has become very good at hiding and not being found when we don't want to be found, because quite frankly, being found and being visible often comes with a lot of pain and violence for us. And especially when there's research that's conducted by cisgender people or people who aren't part of our community, it's hard to trust. And it's hard to trust that really our best intentions are at heart, because you have to understand there's a really long history of problematic, painful, or outright violent research that's been conducted on transgender populations. So we, as members of the community who are also trained in research, we're really confident that our 30,000 number is there. And we're really confident that our unique approach, as Jay was kind of describing, of having trans people being the ones on the ground connecting survey takers to each other, that is really the approach that is going to get us the largest sample possible.
And Jay, what is the timeline for this project?
About a year. So we just did our big push and announcement on June 1st, and I believe that we'll start taking actual surveys a year from June 1st next year.
Okay. And Dylan, what is the importance of getting this localized data compared to the national stats on trans people?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I was mentioning earlier, what local data really does is it lets you meet the needs of your community. This is not research that is purely invested in sort of answering fascinations or questions about trans people. It's not research that's invested in producing generalizable knowledge, although it certainly will. It's ultimately research which is primarily invested in improving the material conditions of trans life in Chicago and Cook County. And you simply can't do that if you don't have data from trans people in Chicago and Cook County. What makes our project so uniquely strong is on the front end, on the back end, and every stage in between, trans leadership is centered. And that's what's going to make this a survey that is able to actually have that impact.
Jay, how do you both envision this data can benefit trans people in Cook County?
Well, the main reasons, we know that funding is a numbers game. So being able to have numbers that represent our community in an accurate way will be able to perpetuate funding for trans communities.
Okay, and how can trans people get involved in the survey process? Jay, I'm going to ask you that one. Yeah.
Well, first of all, you can always reach out to info@bravespacealliance.org. If you follow us on Instagram @BraveSpaceAlliance, we'll be posting different sign-up sheets and facts and answers questions sheets for folks to sign up and get involved with the survey. You can sign up to be a part of our street team. There's opportunities to sit on our board for the survey. So yeah, just pay attention to our Instagram, pay attention to our website, and we'll be dropping all of those links to actually sign up and get involved.
Keep up is what you're saying. All right, my
That's
thanks
right.
to Dylan Felt and Jay Rice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Up next, a local artist explores his Mexican roots in contemporary American art. Stick around. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team on the city's spiking violence. But first, Mexican artist Gabriel Villa is exploring both his personal and professional transformation as an artist in a new exhibit coincidentally called The Metamorphosis of Gabriel Villa. Arts correspondent Angel Edo shares more from the Hyde Park Art Center.
For independent artist Gabriel Villa, his work inherently is a reflection of his identity.
I can't help it. Like everything I do is just loaded with my culture. I think that's interesting, and I don't resist it, but at the same time, I'm not thinking about it like consciously.
For over 20 years, Villa has subconsciously explored his Mexican-American heritage through drawings, paintings, and most recently, sculptures.
Culture, depending on the point of view that's being seen, like socially and globally, and also like in what type of storyline it's being delivered. Sometimes, it can come across as the immigration experience, or it can come across as a stereotype, or it can come across as they stick all Latino artists into boxes, that kind of thing. I want to challenge all those notions, and at the same time, I want to celebrate them.
Villa acknowledges those challenges and celebrations by creating works that offer social critiques or by telling personal narratives. But that isn't always the case.
My ceramics, in my opinion, are much more fluid, and as I kept following the process of the ceramic pieces, they started to become less and less narrative, which is a bit different. It's a bit of a departure, and at their core, I think they're a celebration of the creative process. Part of my favorite thing about making art is trying to tap into something that's not obvious to me. And I started to really discover how can I push my own boundaries of creating form, and what can the imagination reveal to me.
Unlike most artists, Villa's work isn't reflective of a particular style.
My work challenges people. I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's an easy see. I think you have to really stand in front of my work and try to not find the answers or trying to figure out what the artist is trying to communicate. But my work they're a bit of the paintings are sometimes what I call they're head scratchers.
There's really only one thing Villa seems to hope people find.
I would like a viewer to get a notion also, this is something that I think about a lot, is what does American art look like? What does really contemporary American art looks like? Well, it looks like this. I mean, to me, even though it has a heavy Latino, Mexican-American perspective, but that's an American story.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And you can see the metamorphosis of Gabriel Villa at the Hyde Park Art Center until July 24th. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a rare syndrome linked to kids with COVID-19 infections is more likely to occur in some children than others. We share the details of a new study.
I will not sign a bill that does not match the gravity of this moment.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the latest out of Springfield and Chicago's City Hall. And Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin on some of his upcoming projects and getting an honorary Northwestern doctorate 50 years after graduating. But first, some more of today's top stories. U.S. Congressman Bobby Rush says his calls for a new postmaster in Chicago have finally been heeded. In a statement, Rush says that he learned that Eddie Morgan Jr. has replaced outgoing Chicago postmaster Wanda Prater on June 12th. Rush said he'd pleaded with the U.S. Postal Service to change leadership after more than 150 postal routes went undelivered in Chicago in May, and another 20 to 60 routes were only partially delivered. Students at Illinois Institute of Technology will have a new president starting in mid-August. The school has named its first Indian American president in Raj Eshambadi. Eshambadi is currently serving as dean of the business school at Northeastern University in Boston and replaces outgoing president Alan Crum. And if you're planning to spend some time downtown this summer, you'll notice State Street is looking a bit different because part of it will be closed. The city announces the dates for Sundays on State, part of a series of summer events downtown to draw residents and visitors back into the neighborhood. The series will close a stretch of the street between Lake and Madison for live theater, wrestling, yoga, musicians, outdoor dining, sidewalk sales, and more. The first Sunday is July 11th. You can visit our website to find out other closure dates and times. A new study finds that a rare condition linked to kids with COVID-19 infections is more likely to occur in Black, Latino, and Asian children than their white counterparts. WTTW News reporter Kristen Tometz joins us now with more details from that study. Kristen, we know this rare condition is called multisystem inflammatory syndrome. What is this and what are the symptoms?
Right, so multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, or MIS-C, is a rare but serious condition linked to kids with the coronavirus. Now, the condition can cause inflammation throughout the body, including in the heart, lungs, kidneys, brain, and other organs, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Symptoms can include fever, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, rash, and fatigue.
And what did the study discover, and what do researchers make of those findings?
Sure. So researchers analyzed data from the CDC that looked at nearly 250 children with the syndrome between April and June of 2020. And what they found was 96 of those kids were Hispanic or Latino, and 75 were Black. And those two groups alone accounted for nearly 69% of those studied. Researchers also found that Latino, Black, Asian, and Pacific Islander children were more affected by the condition than whites. Now, researchers don't say why that is. And a local doctor I spoke to said it's possible that it could be environmental or biological factors at play, but both he and the researchers say more research is needed to study the risk factors for this specific condition.
Okay, Kristen Tometz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brandis.
And you can read Kristen's full story on our website, where you can learn more about the mechanics of MIS-C and potential biomarkers for early detection. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And now we return to more of our interview with author and screenwriter George R.R. Martin, who just received an honorary doctorate from his alma mater, Northwestern. After graduating in 1971 with a bachelor's and a master's in journalism, he was able to receive conscientious objector status to the Vietnam War. While he never worked as a journalist, he put his writing skills to use both during alternative service and writing fiction on nights and weekends.
By the time my alternative service was up, I had sold, like a dozen stories. I'd been nominated for an award. I had a burgeoning career as a fiction writer. So I did not go out and look for a job again. I decided I would follow this path and see where it led. I didn't have any obligations at the time. I was in my early 20s. I was living with roommates in Uptown. We had a big, rambling old apartment that I shared with like 6 people, and the rent was small. And So I didn't need to make a lot of money, which is good because I wasn't making a lot of money. But it led me down that path, and you know, that path has worked out pretty well for me.
So the Game of Thrones finale aired 2 years ago this spring. You know, 2 years later, how do you look back and view that entire series, which became really a phenomenon?
It did become a phenomenon. It was the most popular television show in the world for a time. It won more Emmys than any other show in television history, which is, those are both very exciting things, and I'm very pleased to be associated with it. And it also made me famous, which I have mixed feelings about. I think it was Bill Murray who said, if you dream of fame and fortune, try just fortune first. And there is something to say that. Fame is definitely a double-edged sword. But, you know, Westeros, I've been writing stories about Westeros and the people who live there, the Seven Kingdoms, since 1991, since I began that. It's such a huge part of my life at this point, and now I'm developing more shows for HBO. We have a new show, House of the Dragon, that's coming down the pike, filming right now in London and Cornwall, over in England, probably be on next spring, I guess. But then I'm developing other shows for that, so it's transformed my life, you know, for good or for ill. It is where I am, and I do love Westeros. I love telling stories about it. So there's a lot more stories to tell.
I know that you've recently been a part of developing a video game, and it seems to me like it's sort of a natural fit for a fantasy fiction writer to work on a video game. How is that, you know, different from what we know you for working on?
Well, it actually is considerably different. I've played some video games. I'm not a big video gamer, but the game is called The Elden Ring, and it's a sequel to a video game that came out a few years ago called Dark Souls, and it came out of Japan. My work on it was actually done years ago. These games, they're like movies. They take a long time to develop. Basically, they wanted a world created to set the game in. They wanted world building as a big factor in fantasy and science fiction. You're not only talking about the characters and the plot, but the setting is almost as important as everything else. Tolkien's Middle-earth, Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, the Foundation universe of Isaac Asimov. I worked up you know, fairly detailed background for them. And then they took it from there. So, you know, it's been several years since I've last seen them, but they would come in periodically and show me some monsters they designed or the latest special effects or the cool things. But the game has been very slowly developing, and now it's coming out in January, I believe. So I'll be as excited as anybody else to see it.
And of course, you're limited in what you can say about future projects, but another one of them is working as a producer on an adaptation of the science fantasy novel Who Fears Death, set in a post-apocalyptic Africa.
Right.
What about that project attracted you?
Well, Nnedi Okorafor. Nnedi is a very acclaimed young science fiction fantasy writer. Her parents were immigrants from Nigeria, and she drew on Nigerian folklore and African customs and all that to create the world of Who Fears Death, which was an award-winning novel a few years back, and came to the attention of HBO, who snapped up the rights to develop it for a TV series, and we've been working on it ever since. Television and film are exciting areas to work in, and I did work in them in the past, for about 10 years in the mid-'80s to the 90s, long before Game of Thrones. I was very active in television. I was on the writing staff of Twilight Zone and then Beauty and the Beast. And then I did 5 years of development, which paid well, but ultimately was unsatisfying to me because they develop a lot of things, but they only make a very few of them. And it's very different, at least for my experience in the world of books. I mean, if I write a short story, a novella, a novel, it comes out. They publish it, and it comes out, and if you're lucky and it resonates with the public. Millions of people read it all over the world, like Game of Thrones. If it doesn't resonate with the readers, and I've been there too with books that, oh, this book sold 3,000 copies. Although some of those 3,000 people maybe really love it. So, you know, but it always comes out. You get your chance here with television. Even no matter how good you are, no matter how great the property is, it's such a crapshoot, if I may say that here on television. It's like they develop, 50 projects, and then they make pilots for 10, and they put 2 on the air. And I went through that for years in the 90s, developing shows, writing movies that I loved, that I put a lot of effort and care and passion into, that for one reason or another never got made. So now, when I'm at a different position in my life and a different position in my industry, I try to use whatever, clout or whatever you want to say I have to get good things like Who Fears Death actually made, and every little bit helps. So maybe if my association can get that one before the camera, I think it would be a great show. I hope in a year or two we'll all be watching it.
And before we let you go, of course, you're back on campus to receive an honorary doctorate from your alma mater. You know, what does that mean to you? And would, George R.R. Martin 40, 50 years ago have seen this happen?
No. No, I did. Well, I don't know. I didn't think 50 years ago, I didn't think what was going to, I just worried about where it was going to be next year, and could I pay my share of the rent on that uptown apartment I lived in with my 6 roommates. So it's all been very gratifying. And, they say, well, Tom Wolfe said you can't go home again. It is particularly nice to get an honor like this from Northwestern, where I did go to school, where I attended many classes in this very building, and it does startle me to realize it's been half a century. But still, it's very nice to be back at Northwestern. It's not quite the Northwestern I remembered. It's changed quite a bit since 1971, but there's still enough of it to awaken feelings of nostalgia in me.
And if you missed the first part of our interview with George R.R. Martin earlier in the show, you can find the entire thing on our website. Up next, our Spotlight Politics team on city violence spiking and a potential rename for Lakeshore Drive. But first, a look at the weather. Lawmakers are back in Springfield, infuriating Mayor Lori Lightfoot. All that and more, the focus of our Spotlight Politics. Welcome back to Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon. So, Amanda, you reported on this earlier, a little bit of a late news this evening around the elected school board bill. Illinois legislators, have to deal with a couple of big issues. Of course, that is one of them. This bill got major pushback from Mayor Lightfoot, but it passed anyway. So first, Amanda, what does this bill do?
And it really is significant that this is going to the governor, because you've had the state Senate and the state House in recent years pass various versions of an elected school board bill, but never the other chamber. So it didn't quite get to the governor's desk. This is really poised to become law because, as I noted earlier, Governor Pritzker supports it. So while Mayor Lightfoot has been fighting it tooth and nail, she is not going to find an ally on this in the governor's office. And so what it does is really, again, creates this 21-member board. That 21st individual will be a president, elected at large across the city of Chicago. Everybody else elected within districts that are yet to be drawn. Half of them the whole elected school board would be in place by January 27, but the first elected members would be joining with half of appointees by the mayor after 2025. So you're going to have people running in the general elections in the years 2024 and 2026. This also creates a advisory board for CPS for non-citizens. And then it also puts a moratorium on any school closures, because that, of course, has been something that folks are really upset it happened, particularly under the Emanuel administration. No more of that until 2025, when some of these elected board of education members will be seated.
So what are the mayor's concerns? Because she ran on this very issue of being in favor of an elected school board.
Yeah, she did, and that is something that those who are say, hey, wait a second, what changed? What made you reverse course? She says that what it is that this board would be unwieldy because it is just way too big, particularly in contrast to places like New York and LA, where their boards are less than half this size. And then another big criticism is that this doesn't kind of give enough time for a shift of power to take place, particularly because Chicago, well, yes, the only board where there is no elected school board, Chicago is also the only city that is paying for CPS pensions, whereas all other school districts, those pension costs are paid for by the state. And then finally, another real big criticism is that there aren't any sort of campaign finance limitations on these races. And so you're not going to have a fair representation. First, she says that the setup could mean that there are going to be too many parents from majority white areas on the north side if districts are drawn by population, but also what regular parent or resident is going to be able to afford these races. She says that this is really going to be something where it's going to become a power battle of interest groups, particularly one of her big foes, and that's the Chicago Teachers Union. Actually, I'm just going to throw that one back to you. That's something we hear a lot about. Do you see this as a way for the Chicago Teachers Union to gain even more power?
I'm not sure how much more power they will amass, but there is some merit to the concern that this does give CTU the opportunity to get its candidates elected. And we know that CTU has the ability to do that. There is at least one current city alderperson who is a former CTU member and teacher. Same goes for the Cook County Board of Commissioners. And we know that CTU has done a very good job at being organized and mobilizing around their communities, and that they have the ability to sway a political election, basically, by organizing and supporting candidates and endorsing candidates. And we all know the late great Karen Lewis was gearing up to run against Mayor Rahm Emanuel years ago, and once she endorsed Chuy Garcia, he did get into the runoff with Mayor Emanuel at the time. So there's some concern there. At the same time, I wonder if the mayor is for any number of reasons, she disagrees with this bill, and that may just be one of them. But Heather, I want to get you in here. Mayor Lightfoot, she lobbied hard against this. What could the political fallout be?
Well, it is at least the third in this most recent session of a serious defeat that the mayor has suffered in Springfield. The governor signed a bill that changes the way that city firefighter pensions are funded over her objections. And the governor also signed a bill that expands the power of the Chicago Teachers Union, which we were just talking about, to bargain over issues like the length of the school day and class sizes, which they have really been trying to get back for the better part of a decade, if not longer. So today is the culmination of work that really started under Karen Lewis, who of course died just recently, and is really sort of the capstone to her legacy. It is really a huge defeat from the mayor, who said, just on Friday, she told me that this would cause basically, which would threaten the progress that the school district has made in the last several years, and she really tried to pull out all the stops to get it, and she got nowhere. There were 70 votes in favor of this, which is a pretty strong supermajority. The CTU said as much tonight in a statement that this would be Karen's legacy. This is her legacy. So the Illinois Senate also debated phasing out the use of coal in the state by 2035 in an effort to go green, but negotiations have broken down. Here is what the governor had to say today.
Let me make myself perfectly clear. Our long-term goal is to create meaningful climate change policy that makes Illinois a leader in protecting our people, the environment, and the clean energy industry that we can grow. I will not sign a bill that does not match the gravity of this moment.
So, Amanda, briefly, what is the main sticking point for the opposition? And if a consensus can't be reached, what then?
So there's a whole lot of opposition, and really you have environmentalists that are saying we need to phase out completely coal plants that produce electricity and also natural gas plants that produce electricity. And then you have unions that work at those plants saying, hey, wait a second, there's a whole lot of money and a whole lot of jobs tied up in this. It's most definitely that, but it's also a back and forth. This is become quite the game of finger pointing, and it shows a sort of divide between Governor J.B. Pritzker and the Democratic-controlled Senate led by President John Harmon. So there's some political squabbling that backs this as well, but this really is a significant delay.
Okay, so in city news, there has been a spike in violence over the past week, and Mayor Lightfoot bristled at a reporter's question yesterday about the perception that Chicago is unsafe. Take a look.
But you've got to be concerned about the perception. If people are outside Chicago...
What I'm concerned about, Craig, is the fact that people lost their life this morning. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the fact that there are people who are dead in an act of violence that makes no sense to me. I'm concerned about the families who will be forever scarred by the loss of their loved ones.
So Heather, Mayor here clearly frustrated by the violence. Does she still have confidence in her team and their strategies?
She does. She says that despite the spike in violence this week, which I don't think is a coincidence, occurred just after a huge heat wave. We've often seen violence in the summer track along with the mercury. She said even that the overall trend is heading downward and in the right direction, and she's very proud of that. And she has said over and over again that she has confidence in Superintendent David Brown and that they are trying to address this problem of violence holistically, not just with law enforcement, but also with services and violence interrupters. However, we're not even approaching the 4th of July yet, so there's a lot of summer left to go.
Heather, Mayor Lightfoot also said this is a national issue. What does she mean by that?
Well, her constant refrain when we've had these terrible shootings is to call on the Biden administration and Congress to pass more gun control laws. So while Chicago might have some of the toughest gun control laws on its book, it is powerless really to stop the flow of illegal guns from other states like Indiana, where the laws are much looser. And that's what the mayor wants to see changed, and that's what she's called on the Biden administration to do. However, you and I and everybody else knows that gun control isn't moving anytime through the 50-50 United States Senate. So that seems to be a little bit sort of pie in the sky hopes and not directly sort of drilling down on what's happening on Chicago's streets.
So also another issue that the mayor is pushing is to limit alcohol sales by forcing liquor businesses to close at 10, but there's been more pushback. Heather, what's going on there?
Well, originally the mayor wanted that cutoff to happen at 10 p.m. because she said that many of these liquor stores become nuisances where people loiter outside and criminal activity occurs. That brought just howls of protests for people who love their late night tipples. And she compromised, and the measure that will be considered tomorrow morning in committee would cut it off at midnight. But that would still be a significant change because most liquor stores have licenses that allow them to keep selling until 2 a.m. So we'll have to see if that makes it through as part of a 93-page ordinance that tries to help businesses restart and relaunch after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Amanda, is this just another instance where the mayor is bigfooting businesses and aldermen?
I think that this is, as with all else, there's two sides to it. As Heather pointed out, there's frustration that there's loitering, that you're going to have folks that get a little bit rowdy outside of liquor stores or what have you. But certainly this is something that the bar lobby, that restaurant owners, that liquor store owners say, hey, wait a second. When you're talking about violence, this isn't at the root of it. It seems as if she did, at least in this one, take into consideration a lot of that pushback by at least amending the ordinance, getting it to that midnight point. But as Heather indicated, I think that there are folks that are going to say, hey, this isn't enough, particularly when, as ever, you say cross the border. In many places surrounding Chicago, they still have those later night or early morning, if you will, availabilities to get your booze.
And Heather, 30 seconds. This nasty email from the mayor to her staff came to light after a FOIA request. How did the mayor handle her frustration?
Well, she channeled The Shining a little bit while typing over and over and over again that basically she needs a break and that it's not a request and she's going to keep asking. And I think it's indicative of how tense relations have been on the mayor's staff and perhaps a little bit of the trouble she had transitioning from her work as a lawyer to being the top executive in the city of Chicago. The mayor told reporters this week that those problems were all in the past and that they were singing Kumbaya in the 5th floor office of City Hall these days.
Oh, I've got so many questions about that. All right, my thanks to Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon for Spotlight Politics. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. The Morton Arboretum has a new exhibit. We're in Lisle to check it out as the next stop in our In Your Neighborhood series. And a look at some new additions to the Chicago skyline in an all-new Ask Jeffrey. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.